5:56 p.m. A voice screams into the phone. He shot her. He shot the baby. Oh God, he shot Makilia. The 911 dispatcher's fingers fly across the keyboard. Multiple gunshot victims. Blake Road, Cedar Bluff, Mississippi. Witnesses say the shooter is still in the area. Every cop in Clay County gets the call. Lights, sirens, racing toward a rural road where something unthinkable just happened. But they're already too late. 7-year-old Makilia Gaines, the little girl everyone called the Dancing Queen, is dead on the floor, shot in the head by her own cousin. And that's when deputies get the second call. 3 more bodies. David Hill Road, all shot in the head. Then a third call. 2 more dead. Salome Griffith Road, same pattern. Headshots, execution style. 6 victims. 3 locations. 2 hours of pure terror. 100 police officers flood the area. Helicopters overhead. Roadblocks at every intersection. The biggest manhunt Mississippi has seen in years. And they're searching for someone who was never on their radar. Someone with 0 criminal history. Someone who, just hours earlier, walked into his father's house and shot him point blank in the head. His name is Daricka Moore. He's 24 years old. And on January 9th, 2026, he tried to erase his entire bloodline. This is the story of how a family dinner became a massacre. How a dancing 7-year-old became a murder victim. And how one man turned a quiet Mississippi Friday into the deadliest rampage the state had seen in decades. Before we dive into exactly what happened that night, and trust me, the details get even darker, I need you to do something. If this story gripped you, if you want to see more deep dive true crime investigations where we don't hold back on the facts, like, share, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notification. Because what you're about to hear over the next hour is going to shock you. The timeline, the crime scenes, the sheriff's words when he saw what the killer did to that second child, the mother who watched her daughter die. And here's the thing, cases like this don't get the attention they deserve. 6 people murdered in rural Mississippi. This deserves to be told in full, with every horrifying detail. So subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment telling me what you think the motive was. Because even now, months later, investigators still don't have a clear answer. Now let's go back to January 9th, 2026. Let's go back to the moment everything went wrong. January 9th, 2026. Sometime before 5:30 p.m., 123 David Hill Road sits off a quiet rural road in Cedar Bluff, a tiny unincorporated community in western Clay County, Mississippi. It's the kind of place where mobile homes dot the landscape, where families have lived for generations, where your neighbor might be your cousin or your uncle or both. Glenn Moore, 67 years old, lived at this address. It was listed in court records as his home, and also as his son Daricka's address. They shared this property, this space, this life. Glenn was the fisherman in the family, the kind of man who could spend hours on the banks of local creeks with a pole in his hands and peace in his heart. He was a family man. His niece Renee Gaines McMillian would later say, her voice thick with grief, "Every time I saw him, he always had a hug and a smile for me and my babies. I couldn't have asked for a better family." On this Friday evening, Glenn wasn't alone. His brother-in-law Willie Ed Gaines, 55 years old, was there too. Willie Ed was the life of every family gathering, the jokester, the one who could turn any moment into laughter. Willie Ed was the jokester in the family, Renee would remember, the man who made heavy days lighter. And Quentin Moore, 33 years old, was there with them, Glenn's other son, Daricka's brother. Quentin was a father himself, with children and a wife waiting for him at home. He drove an aluminum-colored Ford F-150 pickup truck, the kind of reliable vehicle that's as common in rural Mississippi as sweet tea and gospel music. 3 men, 3 generations, father, uncle, brother, family gathering on a Friday evening, probably talking about the week, making plans for the weekend, just being together. They didn't hear death knock on the door, but death walked in anyway, wearing the face of a son and brother. Daricka M. Moore, 24 years old, arrived at the mobile home armed with 2 weapons, a rifle and a Glock Model 36 pistol. He didn't come to talk. He didn't come to argue. He came to execute. Glenn Moore was shot first. His own son raised a gun, pointed it at his father's head, and pulled the trigger. One bullet, close range, the kind of shot that kills instantly. The 67-year-old fisherman who'd spent his life bringing life out of rivers fell dead in his own home. Daricka didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't show any sign of remorse or second thought. He turned to Willie Ed Geens, the jokester, the man who made people laugh. Another headshot, another family member dead on the floor. Then Quentin, Daricka's own brother, 33 years old, a man with a wife and children at home, with a life ahead of him, with every reason to believe his brother wouldn't murder him in cold blood. Daricka Moore put the gun to his brother's head and pulled the trigger. 3 executions in a matter of minutes. 3 men who never saw it coming. 3 family members murdered in the same house by someone who shared their blood. Investigators would later process the scene and find no signs of a struggle. No defensive wounds. No evidence that Glenn, Willie Ed, or Quentin had time to fight back. They'd been caught completely off guard. Ambushed. Murdered before their brains could even process what was happening. The medical examiner would confirm what was obvious from the crime scene. All 3 victims died from gunshot wounds to the head. Execution style. Professional in its brutality. Each shot placed with precision to ensure instant death. After murdering his father, uncle, and brother, Daricka Moore walked outside. Quentin's Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, keys either inside the vehicle or in Quentin's pocket. It didn't matter which, Daricka took them. He got behind the wheel of his dead brother's truck and drove away from 123 David Hill Road, leaving 3 bodies cooling on the floor behind him. But the truck's engine was still warm. The blood on the floor was still wet. And Daricka Moore's rampage was just beginning. He had 3 more people to kill, including a 7-year-old girl. 299 Blake Road. Approximately 5:45 p.m. Lashana Geens was home with her children. Her 7-year-old daughter Makilia, the dancing queen, the angel on earth, was playing with her siblings. 2 other children were there too, the house filled with the normal sounds of kids being kids on a Friday evening. Makilia Geens was, by every account, an extraordinary child. An angel on earth, literally. Renee Geens McMillian would later write, "She was the dancing queen, a 7-year-old who loved to dance, who brought joy wherever she went, who had no idea that in a few minutes, she'd be dead." Daricka Moore arrived at 299 Blake Road driving his brother's stolen Ford F-150. This was his cousin's house. These were his family members. Makilia was his second cousin. A little girl who should have been safe, protected, loved by the family connection they shared. But Daricka didn't knock. He didn't call out. He didn't announce himself like family would. He forced his way in. Investigators would find signs of forced entry at the rear of the home. Daricka had broken through a door or window, smashing his way into a house where children were present, where a mother was trying to keep her babies safe. What happened next was captured in witness statements that would later become part of court affidavits. Statements so horrifying that even seasoned investigators struggled to read them without feeling sick. Daricka Moore attempted to sexually assault 7-year-old Makilia Geens. Court documents would later confirm what Sheriff Eddie Scott had initially described more vaguely as attempted sexual battery on one of the occupants. The affidavits listed Makilia herself as the victim of Moore's attempted sexual assault. A 7-year-old child, his own second cousin. Daricka Moore tried to rape her. Lashana Geens watched this happen. Watched her cousin force his way into her home. Watched him attack her daughter. Tried desperately to intervene, to stop him, to save her baby. I can't help but to feel like, I could have did more. Lashana would later tell WVA reporter Tanaya McQueen, her voice breaking with grief and guilt. But I tried to do all I, can to help her, to save them, but I couldn't. Whatever Lashana did, whether she fought him, screamed, tried to pull him away, it wasn't enough. Or maybe Daricka's violence was simply too overwhelming, too sudden, too brutal for anyone to stop. Because what happened next occurred in front of witnesses. in front of Makilia's mother, in front of her two siblings. Daricka Moore took his gun, the same weapon he'd used to murder his father, uncle, and brother, and pressed it against 7-year-old Makilia Gein's head. Hannah screamed. The other children screamed. Makilia herself probably screamed, though we'll never know her final words, her final thoughts, her final moments of consciousness before Daricka pulled the trigger. The gunshot in that enclosed space would have been deafening. The 7-year-old's small body crumpled. Blood and brain matter sprayed across the room. Hannah Geins watched her daughter die. "I saw her child die right in front of her two other children," Sheriff Scott would later confirm to reporters. Think about that. 2 children watching their sister get murdered. A mother watching her baby's life end in the most violent way possible. The trauma of that moment, the sound, the sight, the smell of gunpowder and blood, would stay with them forever. But Daricka Moore wasn't finished. He turned his attention to another child in the house. Younger than Makilia, too young to fully understand what death meant, but old enough to know terror. Daricka Moore pressed the gun, still warm from killing Makilia, against this child's head. Sheriff Scott would describe this moment at his Saturday press conference, his voice carrying the disgust of a man who'd seen almost everything in 30 years of law enforcement but had never seen anything like this. According to the statements, after the 7-year-old was violently murdered, a weapon was stuck to the head of a small child in the house. It was unclear if the gun misfired or if Moore did not pull the trigger on the second child. The gun either jammed or Daricka chose not to fire or something else intervened. We'll never know which, but that child, whose name and age have been protected by authorities, survived by the thinnest of margins. That's how violent he was, Scott continued, to shoot one and stick a gun to another one. Hannah Geins would later speak about this moment, about watching one daughter die and fearing she was about to watch another child murdered. "I tried," she told WTVA through tears. "I tried. But there's no trying that undoes a bullet to a 7-year-old's head. There's no effort that brings back a daughter who's already dead on the floor." Daricka Moore lowered the gun from the second child's head. For reasons known only to him, he didn't pull that trigger. He turned and walked out of the house at 299 Blake Road, leaving Makilia Gein's small body on the floor, leaving her mother and siblings traumatized beyond measure, leaving a family destroyed. He got back into Quentin's stolen Ford F-150 and drove toward his final destination. 2 more people to kill, 2 more executions to complete. It was approximately 6 p.m. The sun had set. Darkness covered Cedar Bluff. And somewhere in that darkness, a mass murderer was still hunting. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in real cases told in full. Like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. 1965 Salome Griffith Road. Shortly after 6 p.m., Barry Bradley, 63 years old, and his brother Samuel Bradley, 61, lived mostly in Columbus, Mississippi, about 20 miles east of Cedar Bluff. But they spent weekends at this address on Salome Griffith Road because it was on church property. Barry was Reverend Barry Bradley, pastor at the Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus. The small white frame church sat nearby, a place of worship for families in the Cedar Bluff community. Some of Daricka Moore's own family members attended services there. They sat in pews where Barry Bradley preached. They listened to his sermons. They said amen to his prayers. On this Friday evening, the Bradley brothers were preparing for the weekend. Maybe going over Sunday's sermon. Maybe just relaxing after a long week. 2 brothers in their early 60s, serving God, serving their community, completely unaware that a killer was about to arrive. Daricka Moore pulled up in Quentin's Ford F-150. But this time, he didn't leave the truck in plain sight. He drove around to the back of the house and hid the vehicle. Parked it where it couldn't be seen from the road. This detail is crucial. It shows Daricka knew people would be looking for that specific truck. He'd already killed 4 people. Law enforcement had been called to Blake Road. The manhunt was beginning, though officers didn't yet know they were looking for him. Hiding the truck showed calculation, planning, awareness of consequences. Daricka forced his way into the house. Again, investigators found signs of break-in, evidence that he'd smashed or pried his way inside rather than being invited. The Bradley brothers would have heard the noise, would have come to see what was happening, would have confronted an intruder breaking into their home. They never had a chance. Daricka Moore shot Reverend Barry Bradley in the head. Execution style, just like his father, uncle, brother, and 7-year-old cousin. The 63-year-old pastor fell dead. Then he shot Samuel Bradley in the head. Another execution, another family member gone. The 61-year-old fell beside his brother. Investigators would later process the scene and find the same pattern. Headshots, close range, no defensive wounds suggesting a struggle. The Bradley brothers had been murdered quickly, efficiently, brutally. The exact connection between Daricka and the Bradley brothers remains somewhat unclear. They weren't immediate family like the victims at David Hill Road. They weren't young children like Makilia. But Sheriff Scott mentioned that Barry Bradley was a pastor at a church some of Moore's family attended. Had there been a dispute? Had Daricka held some grudge against the pastor? Or were the Bradley brothers simply the next targets in a rampage that had its own terrible logic? We may never know, because after killing them, Daricka Moore stole another vehicle. A white GMC Acadia SUV that had been parked at the address. He left his brother's Ford F-150 hidden behind the house and got behind the wheel of the Acadia. 6 people dead. 3 crime scenes. 2 stolen vehicles. And Daricka Moore was now fleeing into the Mississippi night, trying to escape a manhunt that was growing larger by the minute. 5:56 p.m. The first 911 call from Blake Road. 7:03 p.m. Deputies finally arrive at 299 Blake Road, more than an hour after the initial call. The delay seems shocking until you understand rural Mississippi geography. Cedar Bluff isn't a town with its own police force. It's an unincorporated area in western Clay County, roughly 125 miles northeast of the state capital Jackson. The nearest sheriff's deputies might be 20 or 30 minutes away. Back up even further. When deputies reached 299 Blake Road, they found a scene of absolute horror. Witnesses sobbing, some hysterical, some in shock so profound they couldn't speak coherently. And on the floor, 7-year-old Makilia Gaines, shot in the head. The deputies immediately called for more help. Medical assistance, though they knew Makilia was beyond saving. Crime scene investigators, the coroner, and most urgently, more officers, because witnesses were describing an armed man who'd forced his way in, attempted sexual assault, murdered a child, threatened another child with a gun, and then fled in a stolen vehicle. While first responders were securing the Blake Road scene, more calls came in. Another location with bodies, 123 David Hill Road. Deputies raced there and found 3 men, all shot in the head. Glenn Moore, Willie Ed Gaines, Quinton Moore. The scope of what was happening became horrifyingly clear. Not 1 murder, not 2, 6 victims across multiple locations. A mass killing in progress. Then another call. 2 more bodies at 1965 Salome Griffith Road. Barry and Samuel Bradley both shot in the head. Sheriff Eddie Scott mobilized every resource he had. Deputies from Clay County, officers from neighboring Monroe County and Lowndes County, Mississippi Highway Patrol troopers, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation agents, Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics personnel, the National Park Service, whose officers work in the area, and the U.S. Marshals Service Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force. Within hours, as many as 100 law enforcement officers had descended on western Clay County. It was the largest manhunt the area had seen in years, possibly decades. Chief Deputy Stephen Woody Woodruff worked alongside Sheriff Scott to coordinate the massive response. They established a command post, set up communication networks, began systematic grid searches. Roadblocks went up at every intersection. Highway 45, the main north-south route through the area, became a gauntlet of checkpoints. Patrol units flooded Cedar Bluff and surrounding communities. Officers went door to door, warning residents to stay inside and lock their doors. There's an active shooter, multiple victims. We have reason to believe he's still in the area. Do not open your door for anyone you don't know. Call 911 if you see anything suspicious. Families throughout Cedar Bluff huddled together in living rooms, doors locked, lights off, afraid to even look outside. The sound of helicopters overhead, the flash of police lights at every corner, the knowledge that somewhere nearby, someone had murdered 6 people and was trying to escape. At the Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus, word spread that Reverend Barry Bradley was dead. Congregants who'd just seen him days before, who'd worshipped under his ministry, couldn't believe it. Murdered, along with his brother Samuel. Shot in their own home. Some of Daricka Moore's family members attended that church. They sat in those same pews trying to process the impossible. Their cousin, their nephew, their relative had killed their pastor. Witnesses at Blake Road had seen Daricka, described him, identified him by name. He was driving Quentin Moore's Ford F-150. Aluminum-colored, distinctive, registered to one of the victims. Authorities had a name, a description, a vehicle. They broadcast the bolo, "Be on the lookout, Daricka M. Moore, 24 years old, African-American, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, armed with at least 2 weapons, possibly a rifle and a handgun. Last seen driving an aluminum-colored Ford F-150. Considered extremely dangerous. Do not approach. Call for backup immediately." The perimeter tightened. Officers took positions at every possible escape route. They knew Daricka could be heading north toward West Point, east toward Columbus, south toward Starkville, or deeper west into more remote areas. Around 7:30 p.m., investigators made a crucial discovery. Quentin Moore's Ford F-150 was found hidden behind the house at 1965 Salome Griffith Road. That meant Daricka had abandoned the first stolen vehicle and taken another. Witnesses at the Salome Griffith location reported seeing a white GMC Acadia leaving the area. Now officers had a new vehicle description to add to the bolo. White GMC Acadia, possibly heading away from Cedar Bluff. Driver is Daricka M. Moore. Armed and extremely dangerous. Hours crawled by. 8 p.m. became 9 p.m., then 9:30, then 10. The massive law enforcement presence continued, but privately, some officers worried. What if he'd slipped through before the perimeter was fully established? What if he'd ditched the Acadia and stolen yet another vehicle? What if he was already in another county, another state? Sheriff Eddie Scott refused to give up. He'd been in law enforcement for almost 30 years. This was shaping up to be one of the worst cases of his entire career. 6 people dead, including a 7-year-old child. Community terrorized. Families destroyed. "We're going to find him," Scott told his deputies. "Nobody goes home until we do." The officers maintained their positions. Every car approaching every checkpoint was stopped. Every driver was questioned. IDs were checked. Faces were compared to Daricka Moore's driver's license photo. Their vigilance would pay off. 11 p.m. 4 hours after the first 911 call. 5 hours after the first murders at David Hill Road. At the intersection of Pine Grove Road and Joe Myers Road, a rural crossroads in western Clay County, officers manning a safety checkpoint spotted a white GMC Acadia approaching in the darkness. They signaled for the driver to stop. The SUV complied, pulling over to the shoulder. Officers approached cautiously, flashlights cutting through the night, hands near their weapons, hyper-aware that this could be their suspect. "License and registration, please." The man behind the wheel looked at the officer. "I don't have any ID on me." Red flags everywhere. In rural Mississippi, everyone drives with their license. Forgetting it, leaving it at home, possible but highly suspicious. Especially on a night when every law enforcement officer in 3 counties was searching for a mass murderer. "What's your name, sir?" The driver refused to answer, just sat there, silent, staring straight ahead. Now the officers knew. This wasn't someone who'd forgotten their wallet. This was someone actively trying to avoid identification. And they were driving a white GMC Acadia, the exact vehicle description they'd been given. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Now." The man complied slowly, hands visible. Officers could see he wasn't reaching for a weapon, wasn't making any threatening moves. But they weren't taking any chances with a suspect who'd already murdered 6 people. "Keep your hands where we can see them. Turn around slowly." One of the officers pulled out his phone. He'd saved Daricka Moore's Mississippi driver's license photo, the image that had been distributed to every officer working the manhunt. He held the phone up, shining his flashlight on the suspect's face, comparing the photo to the man standing in front of them. The face matched. The build matched. The age, the features, every detail matched. "Daricka Moore?" the officer asked, though he already knew the answer. The man didn't confirm, didn't deny, just stood there silently, his rampage finally over. At 11:24 p.m., 4 hours and 28 minutes after the first 911 call, Daricka M. Moore was placed under arrest without incident. He didn't fight, didn't run, didn't try to pull a weapon or go down shooting. He simply allowed officers to handcuff him and place him in the back of a patrol car. Officers immediately searched the white GMC Acadia. Inside they found a Rifle A Glock Model 36 pistol, the murder weapons, almost certainly the same guns used to execute 6 people across 3 locations. Ballistics tests would later confirm this, but investigators already knew. Sheriff Scott received word of the arrest at the command post. The suspect was in custody. The perimeter could start to be dismantled. The immediate threat was over. Daricka Moore was transported to the Clay County Jail in West Point, the county seat. He was booked at 3:25 a.m. on Saturday, January 10, 2026, more than 8 hours after he'd murdered his father in that mobile home on David Hill Road. As the patrol car carrying Daricka pulled away from the checkpoint, word spread across the law enforcement network. Officers who'd been manning roadblocks for hours could finally stand down. Helicopters could return to base. The massive presence could begin to disperse. But the horror remained. 6 people were dead. 3 crime scenes were still being processed. And a community was left trying to comprehend how one of their own could do something so monstrous. The manhunt was over. The investigation was just beginning. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in real cases told in full. Like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. January 10th, 2026, 10 a.m. Less than 12 hours after Daricka Moore's arrest. Sheriff Eddie Scott stood at a podium before assembled media. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, the weight of the past 16 hours visible in every line of his face. But he was here, ready to face the questions, ready to give the community answers. Chief Deputy Woody Woodruff stood beside him. 16th Circuit Court District Attorney Scott Colum was there too, representing the prosecution's interests. Local media packed the room. Regional reporters from Tupelo and Jackson. Even national outlets CNN, Fox News, NBC had picked up the story. A mass shooting leaving 6 dead, including a 7-year-old girl, was national news. "This has really shaken our community," Scott began, his voice carrying the strain of nearly 3 decades in law enforcement. "And for me, almost 30 years in, this is one of the toughest ones we've had to work." He laid out the timeline systematically. 3 locations, 6 victims. A rampage that had started sometime before the first 911 call at 5:56 p.m. and ended with Daricka Moore's arrest at 11:24 p.m. The victims: Glenn Moore, 67, father; Willie Ed Geens, 55, uncle; Quentin Moore, 33, brother; Makilia Geens, 7, second cousin; Reverend Barry Bradley, 63, pastor; Samuel Bradley, 61, pastor's brother. "This guy wasn't on our radar," Scott said, and you could hear the frustration in his voice. This is family members that he went after. Online court records confirmed what Scott was saying. Daricka M. Moore had no previous criminal charges, no arrests, no violent history, nothing that would have flagged him to law enforcement as someone dangerous. A reporter asked the obvious question: how does someone with no criminal record suddenly commit a mass murder? "A situation like this, you've got a family member attacking their own family," Scott responded. "Whatever the reason is, we're hoping that we'll find out." Scott described the attack at 123 David Hill Road first. 3 men shot in the head. Glenn Moore, Willie Ed Geens, Quentin Moore. All found dead inside the mobile home that was listed as Daricka Moore's own address. He'd murdered his family in his own home. Then Daricka stole his dead brother's Ford F-150 and drove to 299 Blake Road. Scott's voice tightened as he described what happened there. Moore forced his way into the house and attempted to commit sexual battery. He didn't specify the victim at this press conference, protecting the child's identity, but he confirmed the horror. He then put a gun to the head of a 7-year-old girl and fatally shot her. The room went silent. Reporters stopped typing. Cameras zoomed in on Scott's face. "I don't know what kind of motive you could have to kill a 7-year-old," Scott continued. "It's just none out there that you can use to explain to me why this will happen." Then came the detail that would dominate headlines. According to the statements, after the 7-year-old was violently murdered, a weapon was stuck to the head of a small child in the house. It was unclear if the gun misfired or if Moore did not pull the trigger on the second child. Scott's disgust was palpable. That's how violent he was, to shoot one and stick a gun to another one. Another reporter asked about witnesses. Scott confirmed. The mother and a third child were also present. They witnessed the murder. Hannah Geens had watched her daughter die, had tried desperately to save Makilia and failed, had thought another child was about to be murdered right in front of her. The trauma of that moment, the sound of the gunshot, the sight of Makilia falling, the gun pressed against another child's head, would haunt that family forever. From Blake Road, Scott continued, Moore drove to 1965 Salome Griffith Road. He hid the stolen F-150 behind the house and forced his way inside. There he shot Reverend Barry Bradley and Samuel Bradley, both in the head. Barry Bradley was a pastor at Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus, Scott explained. Some of Moore's family members attend that church. The church connection raised questions. Had there been a religious dispute? Had Daricka blamed the pastor for something? Or was it simply that the Bradley brothers were accessible targets in Daricka's path of destruction? Scott described the arrest. Officers at a safety checkpoint on Pine Grove Road stopped a white GMC Acadia matching the description we broadcast. The driver had no ID and refused to identify himself. Officers compared his appearance to Moore's driver's license photo and positively identified him. He was arrested without incident. District Attorney Scott Colum took the microphone. His message was direct and unequivocal. Based on the extreme nature of the crimes, my office will be pursuing the death penalty against Moore, if eligible. Colum explained the charges in detail. This was important. The public needed to understand why some murders were charged as capital offenses and others weren't. The allegations fit the charge of capital murder, Colum said. For capital murder, you can kill 3 or more people. That qualifies as capital murder. If you kill a child and that's considered child abuse, that can also be considered capital murder. 3 counts of capital murder would be filed. Makilia Geens, 7 years old, killed during commission of sexual battery and burglary. Reverend Barry Bradley, killed during commission of burglary. Samuel Bradley, killed during commission of burglary. 3 counts of first-degree murder would be filed for Glenn Moore, father, Willie Ed Geens, uncle, Quentin Moore, brother. But Colum hinted that those charges might be upgraded. We're reviewing whether the murders at David Hill Road also qualify as capital murder under Mississippi law, he said. Additional charges would include attempted capital murder of a child for pressing the gun to the second child's head, attempted sexual battery of Makilia Geens, 2 counts of burglary, Blake Road and Salome Griffith Road, 2 counts of felony taking of a motor vehicle, the F-150 and the Acadia, 11 charges total. And Colum was clear about the stakes. After he goes through that process, if it turns out that it was not a mental thing and there's no mitigation that will apply to it, then at that point, this is the worst type crime that you can commit in Mississippi. And the worst type crimes have to get the worst type punishments. The death penalty. Mississippi still executes prisoners, though rarely. Since 1976, the state has executed 22 people. But if any case qualified for capital punishment, this was it. Reporters had more questions. About motive, about mental health, about how the community was coping. At this point, we do not know a motive for these acts, Scott confirmed. We're conducting a full investigation. We're interviewing witnesses. We're processing evidence. We will find out why this happened. For this family to lose this many family members in one setting is just hard to imagine, Scott added, his voice heavy. The press conference lasted about 45 minutes. When it ended, reporters scattered to file their stories. The footage of Sheriff Scott saying to shoot one and stick a gun to another one would be played on news broadcasts across the country. But while journalists wrote articles and producers edited segments, families in Cedar Bluff were preparing to bury 6 people. In the days following the massacre, Cedar Bluff, Mississippi, population so small it doesn't even have an official count, tried to process grief on a scale it had never experienced. Renee Gaines McMillian sat at her computer, tears streaming down her face, and started a GoFundMe campaign. She was Daricka Moore's cousin. She'd grown up with him, and he'd just murdered 6 members of their family, including 7-year-old Makilia. Makilia, God. She was an angel on earth. Literally, Renee wrote. She was the dancing queen. The description was perfect. Anyone who'd met Makilia knew it was true. The 7-year-old loved to dance, would break into spontaneous moves whenever music played. Her laugh could light up a room. Her energy was infectious. Uncle Glenn, he was the fisherman in the family, Renee continued. He was a family man. Every time I saw him, he always had a hug and a smile for me and my babies. I couldn't have asked for a better family. Willie Ed was the jokester in the family. 3 sentences, 3 people, 3 lives reduced to memories and GoFundMe descriptions. The campaign was titled Family Assistance for Makilia and Family. Its goal was to help Los Hannah Gaines, Makilia's mother, the woman who'd watched her daughter die, cover funeral expenses, and support her surviving children through the unimaginable trauma they'd experienced. Within days, the GoFundMe raised over $10,000. People from across Mississippi contributed. Strangers from other states sent money. The Clay County community rallied around a family that had lost so much. But money can't buy back a 7-year-old's life. Donations can't erase the image of Makilia falling after the gunshot. Support can't unhear the sound that her mother and siblings will hear in their nightmares for the rest of their lives. United Way of Northeast Mississippi established a family assistance fund specifically for the victims' families. Local businesses contributed. Churches took up special collections. The response was overwhelming. A community trying desperately to do something, anything to help. At 299 Blake Road, Los Hannah Gaines faced an impossible situation. How do you continue living in a house where you watched your daughter murdered? How do you comfort your surviving children when you yourself are shattered? How do you explain to kids that their cousin, someone who should have been family, should have been safe, killed their sister right in front of them? I can't help but to feel like, I could have did more, Los Hannah told WTVA reporter Tanaya McQueen in an interview that aired days after the murder. But I tried to do all I, can to help her, to save them, but I couldn't. The guilt in her voice was heartbreaking. She'd been there. She'd tried to intervene. And Daricka Moore had murdered Makilia anyway, right in front of her mother's eyes. I saw her child die right in front of her 2 other children, Sheriff Scott had confirmed. 3 children who would need years of trauma therapy. A mother who would carry this moment with her forever. At 123 David Hill Road, the mobile home where Glenn, Willie Ed, and Quentin had been killed sat empty. Crime scene tape fluttered in the January wind. The house would need professional cleaning. Blood evidence had been documented and collected, but biological material remained. Some families hire trauma scene cleaners. Others can't afford it and do the grim work themselves. But who would clean this house? Glenn was dead. Daricka was in jail facing execution. Would family members have to scrub their loved one's blood off the walls? The Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus held a special memorial service for Reverend Barry Bradley and Samuel Bradley. The small white church was packed. Congregants who'd worshipped under Barry's ministry, family from Columbus, community members who'd known the brothers for years. Some of Daricka Moore's family sat in those pews, trying to mourn their pastor while processing that their own cousin had murdered him, trying to reconcile love for family with horror at what that family member had done. Edith Watkins Bradshaw, a cousin of the Moore family, spoke to the Dispatch about how the extended family was coping. "Where there's unity, there's power and there's love," she said. "No matter what, we're family. Even Daricka, he's still our family. He's still a human being. We still got to love him too, and we know that love will get us through." That statement, "Even Daricka, he's still our family," captured something profound about faith and forgiveness in tight-knit communities. 6 people were dead, murdered by one of their own, and yet the family refused to completely abandon the killer. Renee Gaines McMillian echoed that sentiment. "Our family will never be the same, but we're going to be stronger because of this." Local churches organized meal trains for the grieving families. Fried chicken, casseroles, cornbread, sweet tea. It's what people do in rural southern communities. When tragedy strikes, you feed people. It won't solve anything, but it's something. A tangible way to say, "We're here, we care, you're not alone." Sheriff Scott spoke at community gatherings, trying to reassure residents that Daricka Moore was in custody, that the threat was over, that they were safe. But how safe can you feel when a family member can turn killer without warning? When someone with no criminal history, no history of violence, can suddenly execute 6 people, including a 7-year-old child? Mental health became a topic of intense discussion. If Daricka had been experiencing a mental health crisis, who could have noticed? Who should have intervened? And what resources existed in rural Mississippi to help someone before violence erupted? Mississippi ranks 49th out of 50 states for mental health care access. Psychiatric services are concentrated in Jackson, Tupelo, and other larger cities. Rural areas like Clay County have limited options. Maybe one community mental health center serving multiple counties, chronically underfunded, perpetually understaffed. If someone is spiraling toward violence in Cedar Bluff, the system often doesn't catch them until after the violence has occurred. The case drew inevitable comparisons to Mississippi's previous worst mass shooting, the 2017 Brookhaven Massacre, where Willie Godbolt killed 8 people, including a deputy sheriff. That case had shocked the state. Now, less than a decade later, Mississippi had another mass killer to add to its tragic history. Parents across Clay County hugged their children tighter, had conversations about recognizing warning signs, about what to do if someone seems unstable. But the truth is, there often aren't warning signs. People who knew Daricka described being shocked, confused, unable to reconcile the person they knew with the monster who'd committed these murders. "He seemed like a normal kid," one neighbor told reporters, requesting anonymity. "Quiet, kept to himself mostly. But I never would have thought. Never in a million years." As we continue, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notification. Monday, January 12, 2026. Clay County Circuit Court. The courtroom was packed. Family members of the victims sitting on one side, the Moores, the Gaines family, relatives of the Bradley brothers. Media filled the press section. Community members lined the back rows, desperate for answers, for justice, for something that made sense. Judge Jim Kitchens presided. He'd seen many cases in his years on the bench, but this one was different. 6 murders, a 7-year-old child, family killing family. Deputies escorted Daricka M. Moore into the courtroom, hands cuffed in front of him, leg shackles. Multiple deputies surrounded him. Nobody was taking chances with a man who'd murdered 6 people. Photographers' cameras clicked. Video cameras rolled. This was the first time the public was seeing the accused killer up close since his arrest. He was represented by Public Defender Clarissa Harris. District Attorney Scott Colum stood ready to present the state's case. Judge Kitchens read the charges. 3 counts of capital murder. Makilia Gaines, 7 years old, murdered during commission of sexual battery and burglary. Reverend Barry Bradley, 63 years old, murdered during commission of burglary. Samuel Bradley, 61 years old, murdered during commission of burglary. 3 counts of first-degree murder. Glenn Moore, 67 years old. Willie Ed Gaines, 55 years old Quentin Moore, 33 years old. Additional charges. Attempted capital murder of a child, attempted sexual battery of a child under 14, 2 counts of burglary, residential, 2 counts of felony taking of a motor vehicle. 11 charges total, each one carrying severe penalties. The capital murder charges alone could result in either life without parole or execution. How do you plead? Judge Kitchens asked. Through his attorney, Daricka M. Moore entered not guilty pleas to all charges. Not guilty, despite witnesses who saw him, despite being caught with the murder weapons, despite overwhelming forensic evidence placing him at all 3 crime scenes. Not guilty. The plea wasn't surprising. At this stage, almost all defendants plead not guilty, preserving their right to challenge the evidence and build a defense. Judge Kitchens addressed bail. Under Mississippi law, defendants charged with capital murder are ineligible for bail. The severity of the charges, combined with the extreme danger to public safety, meant Daricka would remain in custody until trial. The defendant will be held without bond at the Clay County Detention Center, Kitchens ruled. Then came the crucial order, a comprehensive mental health evaluation. This wasn't unusual for capital cases, but it was critical. The evaluation would assess whether Daricka was competent to stand trial. Did he understand the charges, and could he assist in his defense? His mental state at the time of the murders. Was he experiencing psychosis, hallucinations, severe mental illness that prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions? The results would determine everything that followed. If found incompetent to stand trial, proceedings would pause while he received treatment. If found to have been legally insane at the time of the murders, unable to appreciate that what he was doing was wrong, the death penalty would be off the table. This court orders a full psychiatric evaluation of the defendant to be conducted by qualified mental health professionals, Judge Kitchens declared. Results to be submitted within 60 days. District Attorney Colum reiterated his position for the record. The state intends to seek the death penalty in this case, if the defendant is eligible under Mississippi law. After the brief hearing, Daricka was escorted back to jail. He'd shown no emotion during the proceedings, didn't look at family members sitting in the gallery, didn't react when the charges were read, just stood there silent, detached. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded family members willing to speak. Edith Watkins Bradshaw, speaking for some of the Moore family, addressed the complexity of their grief. We're mourning 6 people, 6 family members gone. And the person who did this, he's family too. That doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't make it okay. But we can't just shut off love because someone we love did something monstrous. A reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. How do you forgive something like this? I didn't say we forgive it, Edith responded, her voice firm. I said we still have to love him. Those are different things. We can love Daricka as a person, as family, and still want justice for what he did. Where there's unity, there's power. Where there's love, there's strength. That's what's going to get us through this. Renee Gaines McMillian, who'd lost her Uncle Willie Ed and her young cousin Machilia, added, Our family will never be the same. How could it be? But we're going to be stronger because of this. We have to be, for Machilia, for all of them. As January turned into February, the investigation continued. The Mississippi State Crime Lab processed evidence from all 3 crime scenes. Ballistics testing confirmed that the rifle and Glock Model 36 pistol found in Daricka's possession had fired the bullets that killed all 6 victims. DNA evidence placed Daricka at 299 Blake Road and 1965 Salome Griffith Road. Fingerprints matched. Witness testimony was consistent. The forensic case was airtight, but questions remained. The biggest one, why? Why did Daricka Moore murder his father, uncle, brother, and 7-year-old cousin? What could possibly motivate someone to execute their own family? Investigators interviewed everyone who knew Daricka, friends, extended family, neighbors, former co-workers if he'd had any jobs. They built a profile looking for triggers, for stressors, for anything that might explain the rampage. So far, they'd found nothing conclusive. No major dispute with his father. No known grudge against the Bradley brothers. No apparent reason to target Makilia specifically. The attempted sexual assault of the 7-year-old suggested depravity, not mental illness. That's a choice, not a symptom of psychosis. It added a layer of evil to the murders that made them even harder to comprehend. The mental health evaluation would take months. Psychiatrists would interview Daricka extensively, review his history, administer psychological tests, determine whether he was experiencing delusions, hallucinations, or other symptoms of severe mental illness on January 9, 2026. But as of now, months after the murders, prosecutors were confident they'd prove Daricka Moore was fully aware of what he was doing when he murdered 6 people. The hiding of the F-150 showed calculation. The stealing of a second vehicle showed planning. The execution-style headshots showed precision. This wasn't a man in the grip of psychosis. This was a killer who knew exactly what he was doing. The trial was tentatively scheduled for late 2026, though the exact date would depend on the completion of the mental health evaluation and various pretrial motions. If convicted on all counts, Daricka Moore faced either execution by lethal injection, Mississippi's method of capital punishment, life in prison without possibility of parole. At 24 years old, life without parole meant spending the next 50 to 60 years in a Mississippi prison before dying of old age behind bars. Either way, Daricka Moore would never walk free again. Over the following weeks, Cedar Bluff held 6 funerals. Glenn Moore's service celebrated the fisherman, the family man, the 67-year-old who'd lived his entire life in Clay County. Friends told stories about fishing trips, about Glenn's patience, about his hugs and smiles. Willie Ed Geens was remembered as the jokester who could lighten any moment. The funeral was filled with laughter through tears as people shared his best jokes, his funniest moments, the ways he'd made their lives better. Quentin Moore's funeral was particularly heartbreaking. He left behind a wife and children who would grow up without their father. His widow spoke briefly, her voice barely above a whisper. He was a good man, a good father. He didn't deserve this. Makilia Geens' funeral was perhaps the hardest. A child's casket is smaller, lighter, fundamentally wrong. The 7-year-old who loved to dance would never dance again. Would never grow up, never go to middle school, never fall in love, never have children of her own. Los Hannah Geens sat in the front row, supported by family members on either side, her 2 surviving children beside her. They'd watched their sister die. Now they were watching her be buried. The Apostolic Church of the Lord Jesus held a joint service for Reverend Barry Bradley and Samuel Bradley. The church was packed with congregants, family from Columbus, and community members. Some of Daricka Moore's family attended, sitting in the back, mourning their pastor while carrying the weight of knowing who had killed him. At each funeral, the same questions hung in the air. Why? Why did this happen? Why these people? Why Daricka? And no one had answers. As of early 2026, the Daricka Moore case proceeds toward trial. But the fundamental questions remain. What was the motive? Investigators still don't have a clear answer. There's no evidence of a major family dispute. No known grudge. No apparent trigger that would explain why January 9, 2026 was the day Daricka decided to murder 6 people. Was this planned or impulsive? The execution-style headshots suggest some planning. The hiding of the F-150 shows calculation. But the lack of any clear motive suggests something else. A sudden break, a snap decision, something that erupted without warning. Could this have been prevented? Daricka had no criminal record, no history of violence, no red flags that would have alerted anyone he was dangerous. How do you prevent something when there are no warning signs? Will he face the death penalty? That depends on the mental health evaluation and the trial outcome. If convicted and found eligible, Mississippi prosecutors are seeking execution. But the road from indictment to execution chamber is long, with many opportunities for the sentence to be reduced or overturned. How does a community heal from this? 6 people murdered in one night, families destroyed, children traumatized, a small town forever changed. There's no timeline for healing from something like this. Sheriff Eddie Scott, approaching 30 years in law enforcement, will remember January 9, 2026 as one of the worst nights of his career. For me, almost 30 years in, this is one of the toughest ones we've had to work, he said, and he'll carry those images. The crime scenes, the victims, the 7-year-old child, for the rest of his life. District Attorney Scott Colum will pursue justice with the full force of Mississippi law. He'll argue before a jury that Daricka Moore deserves the ultimate punishment for the ultimate crime. Defense attorney Clarissa Harris will fight for her client's life, arguing mental illness, diminished capacity, anything that might save him from the execution chamber. And in a cell at Clay County Jail, Daricka M. Moore sits, awaiting trial, holding whatever secrets explain why he murdered 6 members of his own family on a Friday evening in January 2026. The dancing queen will never dance again. The fisherman will never cast another line. The jokester will never make anyone laugh. The father, the brother, the pastors, all gone. And a community in rural Mississippi tries to understand how family could destroy family so completely, so violently, so senselessly.